my philosophy is all about, embracing adventure, living life on your own terms, whatever that happens to look like. And for me,
Mm,
that happens to be about travel and living abroad, but that's not
mm,
necessarily what the podcast is about. However,
mm.
I
Mhm.
am doing a series on women who are living abroad and how they got to do that, because a question I just see coming up over and over again, and I'm not seeing what I think are satisfactory answers for
Mhm.
people who are not educators, because that's my
Mhm.
background, and that's how I initially went abroad 4 years ago.
Mhm.
People who are not educators are really kind of at a loss for what they can do. And I know
Mm.
there are, tons of possibilities, especially if you think
Mhm.
outside the box. But for whatever reason,
Mhm.
that information is not getting to the people who need it.
Okay, interesting.
So I
Okay.
decided to kind of throw myself in the fray and help facilitate some of that, which is how I came to be messaging you.
So there's the predominance of a lot of educators that are actually going abroad,
Well, yeah,
I
because
guess.
it's a
Mm.
fairly easy thing,
Mm. Mm.
or at least it has been. I think it will continue to be, if the
Mm.
United States survives the presidency of Donald Trump. It may continue to be
God
because,
help us all.
yeah, there is the desire for people to be taught in English. The US,
Mhm.
UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, those are the markets that they target, because, in these other countries, they want their kids to be taught in English by native speakers. And so if
Yeah,
you're
sure.
already a certified teacher, going abroad that way is pretty easy. And then, a lot of people they teach English. Like
Mhm.
I dabbled, at one point I thought I was going to be retired, and I dabbled in that and discovered that I enjoy speaking English. I do not enjoy teaching it. So I think there seems to be, I guess this is my own take, that when it
Mhm.
comes to employment in the United States, people think very much in terms of, my degree is in A. That means I can
Mhm.
get job B, C, and D. And
Sure.
they don't
Mhm.
really think outside of that. And I think when you go
Mhm.
abroad, you really do have to step out of that box. This is the Picky Girl Travels the World podcast, and I am your host, Adalia of pickygirltravelstheworld.com. My guest this week is Jeannetta Craigwell-Graham. She's a Japanese-speaking attorney turned entrepreneur who can power lift over 600 pounds, who's currently living in Rwanda. Did I miss anything in there?
Yeah, actually, it's a bit of a complex situation, but I go between Rwanda and Denmark now as of nearly a year, as of last August. Decided to do kind of like a partial relocation or whatever you want to call it. The business is still based in Rwanda, and now I live in Denmark, so I go back and forth, or I did go back and forth every other month to Rwanda. So
Okay.
it didn't really feel like I moved completely, but we did kind of move our residency, as you might call it.
Okay. So your primary location is in Denmark.
That's right. Yeah, it is.
Okay. And I assume because of the pandemic, you've just been hanging out in Denmark.
Yes, I have not traveled. And yeah, I actually was I last in Rwanda in March when the pandemic was just really kicking off here, at least in Europe, and had to cut my trip short in Rwanda in order to potentially not get stranded or kept out of Denmark, because everyone started to close their borders, so I think I got like one of the last flights out of Rwanda, that the last reasonable flights that were scheduled that didn't cost $1 million. Got one of the last ones out to come back to Denmark, because we weren't certain when that would be possible. So yeah.
Well, I find that incredibly fascinating, along with the fact that, okay, you in school at the university, you majored in politics, which isn't super surprising for somebody who would eventually become a lawyer, but you also had a
Mm-hmm.
focus on Japanese language and culture. That caught me
Mm-hmm.
off guard. Why'd you choose Japanese?
Well, I really loved languages even from when I was younger. I think I just love language because I'm a big reader and I've always have been, and I love words. And so, and writing and stuff. So I took French and Spanish and Latin in high school. And then when it came to college, it was a requirement at my school that you go to a certain level in foreign language. And I also, at the time, was thinking, oh, it would be competitive job-wise to have Japanese. That's no longer the case. It would have been better looking back on it to have Chinese. But it is what it is. So that's why I chose it. And I also thought it would be challenging with the whole writing component and reading component because they have different characters, different alphabets, or character system. And so that's the reason why I chose it. And I thought it was an interesting culture. So it was kind of partially job related, partially interests in the challenge and interest in the culture and stuff that led me to
Now,
study. And I think it was like I was like the second person to graduate, so I was also very new at the university I went to with that degree. So yeah.
now, did you ever live in Japan?
I did. I studied abroad twice when I was in college, and then at my law firm. During your summer, you could choose to either base yourself in the home. You can base yourself basically, or choose to base yourself in any of the offices. It's a global law firm, so they had offices all around the world, and I chose to split my time between because I could never choose just one of anything. That's one of my issues. That's why I have double of everything and two places I live and two majors and, two different types of, everything. So I decided to split my time between New York and Tokyo. So I spent a summer there as well. And then just last year, was in need of a bit of a break from Rwanda and just life generally. And my family and I actually rented a camper van and spent 2 months driving around and sleeping in a camper van. So yes, I've been several times and lived for short stints, but never for very long periods of time.
I also find interesting how you ended up eventually living in
Mm-hmm.
Rwanda. You
Mm-hmm.
you were working on a project in Tanzania initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I think in terms of the subject of the discussion, which is like how can we find opportunities, or how can one identify opportunities, non-traditional opportunities that will allow them to pursue a career abroad outside of like the teaching framework. One thing that people could look into, especially if they work for international companies, firms, institutions, NGOs, is getting plugged into those projects that have some sort of global reach or impact. Because the reason why I ended up living in Rwanda was because my firm had this long-standing running program where they would send attorneys to Tanzania to support prosecution of basically persons that were indicted for the Rwandan genocide at the UN Tribunal for the Genocide. So they have been doing that for 10 years. And you go for, it's like a pro bono experience, and you typically go for a month. I somehow was able to convince them, and also because I did have a case I was working on, and because I found it so fascinating, and I was completely like really drawn into the experience of living in Tanzania, to let me stay for, I think I stayed for 3 months. And through that, I met a friend of a friend who told me about this position that you would have never found. It was advertised maybe in The Economist, but who even knows The Economist has a job section? They do. Maybe I would have never found it, but it was through this opportunity from my existing employer that led me to this other opportunity, and interviewed, and the rest was history. I had actually in between that gone back to my firm and asked if I could be transferred to the London office, and that was in process because I wanted to work more on projects within the continent. And found out I got this other job and moved to Rwanda. So it was quite unexpected, and that's sometimes how you find things.
The kind of work that you were doing in Rwanda, you would
Mm-hmm.
classify it as development, correct?
Yeah,
Now,
yeah. I would, yeah. Mm-hmm.
okay, could you explain what that means?
Good point. Maybe I'm not the expert. uh, yeah, and maybe I'm a little bit skeptical as well. I would generally classify, I guess, international development as uh, programs, projects, institutions devoted towards supporting efforts of governments, sovereign governments, to improve, and to basically develop. And that means usually, if we're talking about like lower income countries, trying to improve, economic, poverty line, improving the overall economic wealth, or whatever, prosperity of the country. It could mean social issues such as things dealing with women and access to proper healthcare, access to birth control. It could also mean agriculture, access and improvement of agricultural processes and systems. It's really broad ranging. It looks at cross sectors and across institutions too, because you could say development is also working within an NGO that might be focused on supporting reforms in the judiciary section, or you could say development was working within the EU delegation, so the European Union embassy in Kigali, for example, and you're working on developing projects for Rwanda to support their international development. So it really is a very large sector with a lot of different areas of focus, and very too broad, which is also the issue with it.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was going to say you said something about being somewhat skeptical, and the few people I have talked to who do work in development have also alluded to having a certain amount of skepticism about the whole thing as well. So that just kind of
Yeah.
tickled me.
Yeah, no, and I guess it's because like it's a big experiment, and no one else that we know that is currently a developed country is, I mean, not very many examples have gotten to where they are by using this route, right? I mean, the United States is not because EU was giving grants that United States is the United States, right? The United States is the United States because of a lot of different reasons, most of which relate to creation of something, manufacturing, production, etc., and a lot of other policies and other sorts of things, and those things, and a lot of time as well, hundreds of years. So what we're seeing is like we're seeing, very kind of, to me, very idiosyncratic, very piecemeal attempts to kind of transform economies and transform governments in kind of very haphazard experimental ways. Let's try this here, let's try that there. And to me, not focusing on some of the fundamentals, I mean, of course, people say, yes, we need to focus on building infrastructure and roads and stuff, but I think the way in which it's dispersed and managed, it makes it really impossible, because I think, where so many of these economies are very dependent on a donor deciding to do certain things rather than having a lot of autonomy over the development of a country. There's so many problematic things with it. So we have to take another podcast or another episode to talk about that, and have some maybe reformed development people come on and speak about it. But
Well,
There's lots of problems with it, and I think it comes from good intentions, but there's lots of problems with it.
I spent almost 20 years teaching geography and human
Mm,
geography. So that's my own
mm,
little personal nerdy interest in that. Other people probably are
mm.
not excited about that at all.
Yeah, no, interesting.
At what point, because, okay, so were doing what was supposed to be a month-long stint in Tanzania
Mm-hmm,
that you parlayed into something like 3 months, that then set up this
mm-hmm,
opportunity for this job in Rwanda. But,
mm-hmm,
many years later, you were still in Rwanda. So, like,
mm-hmm.
at what point did you know that you would be staying in Africa?
No point. I really, I thought I had a 1 year contract to work at the Rwanda Development Board, and I was hopeful, of course, that that would be beyond a year because a year is quite short. And I really did. I thoroughly enjoyed my experience. So I worked within the government's investment institution, supporting the negotiation and structuring and supporting and development of strategic projects across priority sectors within Rwanda. So, foreign investor or local investor decides they want to invest in, let's say building a solar power plant, and we support the project and helping structure it and also negotiate it on behalf of other government institutions. So I was looking forward to that, but I always imagined that I was going to be kind of moving around every 2 years, kind of just going wherever I felt the urge. And it was an interesting experience, actually. The reason why, as a background, I ended up staying for so long is that in this process, randomly decided to start a gym. Had been an athlete and decided to start a gym, and so had a business, and so I had a reason to stay and stick around. But it was a challenge because I think one was this like kind of wanderlust, this like itchy feet kind of feeling that I have after like, I don't know, 2 years or something. And then there was also this component of wanting a different type of challenge. I was happy to go to someplace else in Africa, but wanting a different type of challenge. Wondering if Rwanda was like the best fit for me in terms of the kind of culture, living environment. It's very quiet. And I lived in New York before I moved there, New York City. So I'm like, it's got to be loud, crazy, and someone's got to be, like about to take a poo on a stoop or something. It's just got to be crazy. Like,
No, I
I want
understand
it to be
completely.
wild. Yeah, when you said Mexico City, I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like Mexico City, which has to be what, the biggest city in the world. I mean, so I think that a little bit of me was just dying in all the quietness. And it's a very much a group mentality kind of culture as well. So it's very small, group oriented. Everyone's doing what it kind of the same thing, that kind of thing. So there's not like a big diversity in opinion and expression and vibrancy that I tend to like. So I kind of just stayed and stayed till the point where it wasn't a good idea to stay any longer. And finally we made a decision to try to see if we can make it work with us, like relocating and still having the business.
Moving or relocating to Africa,
Mm,
I feel like it's been growing in popularity, that there is a large number of Black women, especially, who have an
mm,
interest. And
mm,
I would like the opinion of somebody who has lived there for an extended
mm,
amount of time. What should somebody know before they make a move like that?
mm. So I lived in Rwanda for 7 years. So that's probably well beyond the typical lifespan of a lot of expats. I'm sure you're aware. A lot of people have 2 year contracts or 3 year contracts or maybe even 4 year contracts, but there's a lot of turnover, right? So you really start to understand a bit more, and not to say I completely understand, because one big thing, I didn't understand the language the longer you live there. And I think in order to fully appreciate an experience like living on the continent. I can only speak for Rwanda and maybe some limited understanding of like other places in East Africa as well. I never lived in West Africa. I can't say much about that. There's got to be like, I don't know, I would call it like this incredible flexibility of spirit, because I think like it's not always predictable. It's not programmed. It's not like, you go here and this happens, or you go to the restaurant and you're going to get that, not this, or you speak with someone and they're going to do what because of I think there's a couple of different things at play, and that happens everywhere, like cross-cultural communication, but there's also like understanding and expectations, and so many of foreigners in Rwanda, Black or otherwise, female or male, have a lot of expectations when they come, and they get frustrated when those expectations aren't met. And you just kind of got let a lot of that go, especially with this respect to the small things. I think of the reason why I don't like Rwanda is not because of those kind of small things. I managed those. It was more like the bigger things, but you have to, manage your expectations with respect to a lot of daily transactions and just like the transactions of life that we all do. I get up, I turn on my water. Oh, wait, you may not have water today. And if you can't manage your, emotional well-being or your stress levels when those things happen, it's going to be a very challenging place to be, because of course, like, stress accumulates, and that makes it really difficult for you to enjoy anything if you're stressed. And you may underestimate that stress in a lot of these environments, because that's the second biggest point, because people are speaking the same language. Maybe a lot of people are speaking English or French, and maybe the culture it's there, but maybe it's not beating you over the head, or maybe you're not super exposed. And I'm speaking about Rwanda in particular. So you underestimate, like, there is cultural shock. It's not, it's like people think, oh, culture shock, they think of going to China or Japan, right? Because they say that's the furthest away from us as you can possibly get from Western values. But there are like plenty of other places that are like also as much, but maybe you don't perceive it or not taking it in, but somehow you are. So you've got to be flexible, and you've got to realize that it is very different. And it's not, it's very different from where some people may have been growing up, and you need to find a lot of grace in a lot of situations and let a lot of things go, and, and just make sure you take lots of breaks to get out and get out of situations, so you can kind of remain calm and collected. Yeah.
Well, I think you hit on something. Human nature is we like to make assumptions that other people think the same way we do. And I worry about people romanticizing relocating to the continent, and having this assumption that, well, we all look alike, so of course we all think alike and know. And I would expect that that's not the case, but I do worry about that. So I'm very thankful that you shared your take on that, your experience.
It is romanticized, absolutely, and that's fine. I think it's, in our day and age, Black people, we could use a little romance. I mean, we could use a little like rosiness in our lives, and and I understand the appeal of that. I think, the assumption thing is totally dead on. I had another point in my head, but it slipped out. But yeah, I think it's important that it's a different country and a different set of people, and that. But what I will say is, this is what the point I was going to make. I can only imagine, like, the positive subconscious, like, I don't know, like the kind of positive impact that our self-image and our self-concept of our value and our self-worth gets very I can only imagine it's getting very nourished in environments where everyone looks like us. I guess I really underestimate that. Now I'm in Denmark, and I'm like obviously the complete opposite. and people that are from, like, let's say the Caribbean. My mom is from the Caribbean actually, or other people in Africa also talk about like, hey, everyone looks like me and the leaders look like me. And when I go in the store, everyone looks like me. That has got to, that had to have some sort of positive effect that I didn't realize. It was subconsciously getting into me. And being able to be in Black spaces, at least, I can imagine is also a pleasant surprise, would be a pleasant surprise for a lot of people that decide to make the move.
I think you're right about that. The first time that I went to Jamaica, I didn't realize it at the time, but I kept thinking like there was just something about it that I really enjoyed it. And when I look back at it objectively, it's not that I did anything fancy or anything was remarkable about it. And it wasn't until years later it occurred to me that was the first time in my life I'd ever been someplace where I was in the majority, and how different that felt.
Yeah, right. Like the transaction, again, we're talking about transactions, or I was talking about that earlier, and like those daily transactions, which we are stressed normally, and the spaces that we are in the US, at least, there's some amount of stress that's going on. Like, imagine that's just gone. So I think about that a lot now, in the spaces I am in, and I wonder, maybe that's alone a good reason for some people to decide to make the move, and to have that experience, at least.
Was it difficult to start your business in Rwanda?
No, it's actually very easy to start a business in Rwanda. It's that's one of the reasons why a lot of people actually do choose, even though it's a very small market, to start there, because you can get the business registered in a day. I don't think you can do that in the US. I'm pretty sure you can't. And you get everything set up to start the business. I think what's more difficult is to to grow in Rwanda. So you may be able to start it and have some success, but if you're looking to grow on a much bigger scale, it's a very small country compared to some of its neighbors. Tanzania is big, Ethiopia is big. Of course, we know Nigeria is massive, in terms of number of people, but also in terms of purchasing power and level and the kind of GDP and economy and stuff like that. It's just a very small country, so we've struggled more on the growth side than we did on starting the business side. Yeah.
Any words of advice to women who are thinking about starting a business in Rwanda?
Think carefully about whether or not you are doing something that not only a few hundred or even a few thousand, if we're looking at but that you think that there's potentially like millions that are going to appreciate it, because it's a lot of work and effort, and to reach only a certain level, and after all the work and effort, would be kind of disappointing. So, you're going to put all the effort and work into it because you want it to be successful, and it's going to be successful from having a lot of customers or whatever, or clients, or whatever the context is. And so if you can't get there because there's something like in the business model, or there's not enough clients or et cetera, then you might not consider, Rwanda might not be the place for you, because you're still going to put a lot of effort into kind of building it. But if you're looking for but I think on the other hand, if you're looking for a smaller environment where it's going to be, basically no corruption, or limited to no corruption, easy to start, and, easy to get going. If you want to try something out, I think it's a great country to try something out.
What I'm hearing is don't make those decisions based solely off of emotion, to really put some thought into it.
Yeah, or even like any sort of list, because I think Rwanda's on the top of like doing business or something, or any of these things that saying it's so easy. That's not the sole reason why you might decide to start a business in a country. I mean, I'm sure you've seen, like, there's plenty of lists out there, best places to live, best cities for this, best, and if we just went based on those things, some of us would be in trouble, because we'd be quite surprised And when we
Yes.
get to certain places, it's not what we expect. So yeah, just make sure you do your research and speak to people that live there.
So how does the experience of living in Denmark compare to living in Rwanda?
Yeah, good question.
I would imagine that's like night and day.
It is like night and day. And then there are some things that are just very eerily the same. Um, it's a homogenous country, right? And the same would go for Rwanda. Like it's pretty much all Rwandans. Um, and it's a small country, actually. Small in size and small in population, half the size of Rwanda, but still a small country. Rwanda's small as well. So I think there's this thing of like homogenous societies, and I'm living in Japan. I have experienced a lot of this too. It's like this kind of group think, and everyone kind of doing things a certain kind of way. I find that to be fascinating because we just don't have that in the US. Like you're prided for like being diverse and singular and individualistic and stuff like that. And that means that like everything you do is like almost, everything in each individual chooses could be so different. Although we do have like, I guess, certain common values and stuff. But here it's because it's small and it's homogenous and stuff like that. You can really feel like the weight of like making sure you do it the way they do it. And, oh, we don't do this way. We do, you have to go on this side of the street and do this, or you have to wait for the stoplight. Like I jaywalk pretty much everywhere I go, but no one jaywalks here. So you were like, oh, can't jaywalk. So I find that interesting. I think I admire the government and people's trust in the government, and I admire the government and the society's belief that if we want a good society for me, if I want a good society for myself, I have to take care of everyone. And it's built around a welfare state where everyone is taken care of in terms of education, healthcare, etc. So for that reason, I really like that aspect of the society. Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying. I really like it here. I don't want to say I didn't like. I do really like it. I was really pleasantly surprised, and I'm still trying to figure out. Not even here a year where I am in this, because I'm not working here and that kind of thing. And so, where's my place here? Have to finding friends is always a challenge, and being away so much has made that more difficult. Getting to know Danish people, learning the language, all these things. But I'm overall very positive about living here, and I'm really happy that we made the decision.
Now, if you choose to work there, or if you wanted to work there, how hard would that be for you to do legally?
So it's quite hard to find jobs here, from what I've heard from a lot of people. But luckily, with like the type of law that I do, which is largely based around contracts and stuff, I can really work for anywhere, and especially in, let's say, big multinationals and companies and stuff like that, which there are here. I could join a legal department or something like that. I don't think that right in the city I'm in the second largest city in Aarhus, there's a lot of opportunities in international development. But if I say went to a city like Copenhagen, there's there's some UN offices there, and there's also NGOs and stuff that work within. If I wanted to do stuff that's more on the development, I think the challenge is that it's a very competitive job environment because it's a small market, and so there's not very many companies, not many jobs. So that'd be the only challenge, is finding something. But I think I could probably find something. And I think when we were speaking earlier, we talked about, oh, I got a degree in X, so that means I have to do X. I mean, my natural inclination is, I realize, even though, when I may be looking for a job, is say, oh, legal officer, like lawyer. Who's looking for a lawyer? But so even I do this myself, but I know that now, after my experience in Rwanda, and even after having my experience in law firm, whatever, you can really apply your skills in so many different ways across different roles. And it's really just to make the argument that, look, I feel like I can do this, especially those things those jobs where maybe, like it's, they're looking, I'm thinking from my perspective, like for operations roles or something like that. I feel that my skills are kind of fungible, and what I've learned, I can apply it across a lot of different departments or whatever roles. That's how I feel about it at this point. But yeah, it's still challenging, right? Doing the job search in the job market, it's not easy, but not looking to do that right now.
And the type of visa you have would allow you to work there.
Yes. So that's the interesting thing about this is like in this global shift in politics to being more populist and more nationalistic. Unfortunately, in the last few years, it's been really much more difficult for people to kind of move here, and they changed the law. And so it took 8 months. I just got it actually last week, my visa. Yay, I guess. And it took 8 months. They changed the law in the last kind of 5 years or so because of fear of immigration. And of course, we had the Syria refugee crisis and et cetera, et cetera. So I had to basically apply for something to reunify with my partner. And we're not married, but he's Danish. So I had to reunify with my partner and my daughter. So I applied for a spousal reunification. Not only did it mean like, waiting this period, but we also, and during this period, I had to like apply each time I wanted to leave the country. And then now we have to provide a guarantee of around $20,000 to the local commune for my application that has to remain in place. Like, so either cash in an account or a guarantee to secure my being here. I guess I don't know if I have any liabilities. I'm actually not too clear about why they want this money, but we had to secure that. And then I just yesterday, as a matter of fact, had to take a Danish language exam. So I have to demonstrate I have a certain understanding of the language and get to a certain level. The other interesting thing is I had to declare on the application that, I would agree to Danish values and Danish culture, that I wouldn't hit my daughter, that I will send the girl children to school. So it was funny to see these decorations I had to make at the end of my application. Largely, it seems like targeted towards around a certain type of immigration.
Yes.
They're concerned around Muslim immigration, right? That I will comply, that I will participate within the community and participate within school life as well for my daughter. So which I never had to do any of this. Didn't have to learn the language. Didn't have to do all this in Rwanda. Took 2 weeks to get visas usually. So it was a big change. And I've guess only done this a few times with respect to visas. So I don't know. This is Europe, maybe. I've never lived in Europe for this long period of time.
I think I think it's Scandinavia. I think that's what it is. That same concern about integration. I know Switzerland has major issues with that, and which is one of the reasons they have been very hesitant to take refugees. I guess it doesn't surprise me that they would want to be reassured that you would embrace, their way of doing things. I guess I'm just surprised that it was worded like that specifically. That's, I think, what takes me aback a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it's like so overt to me who they're trying to target. And I know it's been a challenge for them in terms of integration. Like that's like the whole thing here is like, this is like now the second, maybe even third generation of, let's say if we were talking about specifically Muslim immigrants, but also immigrants from other places in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And what they can see is that these groups of people, they largely stay within their communities. Makes sense. We all know the reasons why. And there's not a lot of integration with society, but that is also changing with younger generations as people open up more and get more understanding of the world. But they view that as like, well, we want them to be integrated with society. We don't want that clash. And I think maybe it represents like the biggest clash they know is like the religion, because they're very anti-religion
I
or
was going to
whatever.
say
Not
very
anti-religion,
not
but very
religious, very
not
secular.
religious in Scandinavia. Very secular. There's the word. That's the correct word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very secular in Scandinavia. And so this is just like, it's like the embodiment of everything. They're like, no, we don't stand for any of this.
Yeah.
So I think that's where part of it comes from. But yeah.
Well, actually, I'm really intrigued by that because in the US, we like to promote the myth of the melting pot, yada, yada, yada. But really, the United States is about assimilation. And
Yes.
it's almost like I'd rather you be very upfront about your expectations of assimilation versus perpetuating this myth that, oh, we can all be diverse and different, when really that's not what you want. So, you
Yeah.
know, you got to give them something for being upfront about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like this, it's again, it's like an expectation thing, right? It's like, okay, now I know what the expectation is in terms of living here, like this thing around speaking the language, right? It's obviously very important to them for certain reasons, and like I should make an effort to try. Otherwise, I could feel that like I could feel alienated and not know why. Well, now I know it's because like, yes, they speak English, but they would prefer a lot of people if they learn Danish. So, and that's the reason why they're kind of forcing you to do that, at least for like my particular type of visa. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's just, it's helping to understand expectations. And, you know, you're still going to struggle in all of it being someone from a different place, right? We just can't help having that our reference is someplace else, and that's going to always be my reference. It's going to be the United States, even in places that seem like very similar to the United States, like Denmark versus someplace like Rwanda. So it's hard.
Well, I do have to ask, how bad is the winter?
You're considering a move.
Well, 'cause
It's not for the faint of heart. Like I had my first one, and Dennis, my partner, he grew up here, right? And he's been away for 10 years, though. So maybe it was a bit different for him, or difficult for him too, as well, to come back. I think it was. So we came back in August because we were like, let's avoid coming back in the winter months because that's just going to be terrible. But you know, I don't mind the cold. I'm like a weird person that actually like winter. I like the whole Christmas season and everything. I don't mind. I like wearing layers. The thing that was a bit of a limitation is the early dark thing. Like it was getting dark at like, you know, towards Christmas and then into the beginning of the year at like 3 or 4, like at 4. And that was like 4 o'clock is early. Like I might even be having lunch at 4 o'clock some days. Like, I mean, it's just really early. And it means that you can't go outside. I have she's 4. God, I can't even remember. She's about to be 5. You know, can't go outside and play and go to the playground, and it's just, and then obviously it's in the air because it's affecting everyone. So everyone just seems a bit down. So then the whole place seems like it's a bit down, but it's not actually that cold. I lived in Boston, so that was real cold. Like we would get snow a lot and it was like windy. It's not cold. It's just like this kind of, I guess it's probably the same across Europe. It's like this gray kind of malaise of winter, and then people just really start to shut down. And I think that's what makes it feel worse, is that people just like, oh, this is terrible. And then it feels more terrible than I think it actually is. Yeah. So you could handle it, I'm sure.
Well, you know, for Chinese New Year, Scandinavia was on my list. It was out of Scandinavia or Eastern Europe, because I was trying to go when it might be cheaper, but then I realized
Yeah.
like that would be the depth of winter, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. And so I opted for Eastern Europe and froze my behind off. And so I have to really do some intense reflection about what I can handle in the winter and what I can't. So I was curious about that. Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us today. If people want to connect with you online, is that something that you do? Do you have outward facing social media?
No, I don't. I'm not a very good social media person, but I mean, I'm on Facebook, and people are more than welcome to message me on Facebook and find me on Facebook. I apologize in advance if it takes me forever to respond, because I tend to avoid it as well. But I don't have
That
an
might be
outward
smart.
facing.
That might be smart.
Exactly. These days we got to control what's coming in. I'm not, but people are more than welcome to reach out to me, and we connect on email or Skype or whatever. I'm happy to have conversations about this stuff. This is like uncharted territory for most of us, right? Because our parents weren't doing things like that. I mean, they could barely travel around the United States.
Exactly.
So it's really uncharted territory, and as much as we can learn from each other, the better. And I think it's getting so much better these days with doing that, with all these wonderful Facebook groups we have, actually. So and other sorts of platforms. So yeah, people are welcome to contact me.
I hope Janetta sharing her experiences as a lawyer and an entrepreneur help you get to thinking about how you can apply your skills in such a way that you can make your move abroad possible. Because really, the possibilities are endless. You really just got to think outside the box a little bit. As always, thanks for listening. In the episode description, you'll find links to the show notes, how to become a patron, and where you can leave a voice note for me with your questions and comments. Your support of the podcast is greatly appreciated. I am beyond thankful, y'all, for all of the reviews and the shares and the donations. Until next time.